and we are live on Dentists Who Invest, live Q&A with Edward Zuckerberg, renowned dentist that we have spoken about on the group quite a few times, and I've been looking forward to this one because Ed is here today to tell us more about himself, of course, but also Keystone Bio and where us dentists can be educated better, I think it's fair to say, Ed, on the relationship between certain bacteria which are prolific in our mouth and are linked systemically to other things that you mightn't necessarily realize. Now, we all know about the flora in the mouth and the systemic links that we have, but you're here today to tell us a little bit about how it's causatively linked to dementia, amongst other things, and your new company that's linked to that. Isn't that right, Ed? How are you, my friend?
Absolutely, I'm great. How you doing today, James?
Really good. You're speaking to us from California, if I'm not correct, and it's bright and early, 8:30 in the morning.
That is correct. You see the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, but I'm about 45 minutes drive south of San Francisco.
That's beautiful. Okay, what we're going to go ahead and do is go ahead and let everybody who is in the waiting room in. We're going to throw the mic out to the audience later on in the broadcast. But Ed, what it might be nice to do for those who don't know is if you were happy to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of an intro, so to speak, before we get on to Keystone Bio and the other stuff that we're going to talk about today.
Sure, happy to. I've been a dentist for 44 years now. I graduated New York University College of Dentistry in 1978 and did a residency in the Veterans Administration Hospital. And within a few months after that,
Just getting some feedback there. Let me just mute these microphones. There we go, Ed. Sorry about that.
Sure. Where shortly after that, I went into my first private practice in Brooklyn, New York, one of the boroughs of New York City, and got married. And my wife went to medical school. She's a psychiatrist by training. And we relocated to a northern suburb of New York City, a little sleepy town called Dobbs Ferry, New York. And we liked it so much, having been city people our whole lives, that we opted to buy a house from a retiring dentist who had a small practice in the house. And after about 4 years, we undertook a fairly major renovation, expanded out the both the lower and upper level of the house to a more modern and more efficient dental practice with 3 operatories, two business offices, and an enlarged front reception area. And for the bulk of my career, I practiced in a practice in my home in Dobbs Ferry, New York. So always an early tech adopter. Back in 1981, I don't think the story about what interest rates were in 1981 is as striking now, because we're backing up quite sharply lately. But for the longest time, we've had like inflation at 1%, 2%, 3%. And back in 1981, interest rates were approaching 20%. And the banks were not really willing to lend a lot of money. They were afraid rates were going to go to 25% or God knows where. It was crazy. I was able to get a mortgage with Citibank for a bargain basement rate of 17%. And only then I was able to save 1% because I agreed to be part of their pilot electronic banking program back in 1981, crazy as it sounds. And the only computers that it worked with at the time were an Atari 800 and a Commodore 64. And I had an Atari 800. So there I was doing electronic banking in 1981. It was a very primitive version. The modem speeds were dial-up and extremely slow. You could see your computer screen advance one line at a time, like something out of an old movie. And I remember how excited I was. And I had to go find my wife, who was buried in her studies somewhere in a remote corner of the house. And I said, "You're not going to believe what just happened." And I just paid 3 bills. I paid the phone company and the electric company and the water company electronically without writing a check. And, looking a little bit skeptical at me, she said, "Well, how long did that take?" And I said, "It took me about an hour." And she's like, "You realize I could write 3 checks and post them in an envelope and have them ready to go in 5 minutes?" And I'm like, "You don't get it. This is going to change the way things are done in the world." And she was like, "You're right. I don't get it, but knock yourself out." So over the years, I've been able to look at various technologies, and I've been fortunate because, let's face it, a lot of dentists have a lot of toys in their closet gathering dust, things that they bought that they thought would make sense for their practice, but really didn't. Um, I put an IBM PC XT in my office in 1985, had my first computer. It was a very poor computer. It was slow and it didn't have much memory, but it was a pretty trusted, loyal employee, never called in sick, and performed, automated tasks and didn't make errors unless you programmed it wrong. In the late 80s, I added the technology to take intraoral pictures with an AccuCam intraoral camera to
In
help
the
me
80s, the 80s.
in the late 80s. Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea that they even had intro cameras in the 80s. Those must have been pretty cutting edge.
Yeah. And, it was always one of the biggest frustrations was knowing what my patients needed, but not being able to convince them. And being able to show them pictures of like a large amalgam with a crack line in it would help them understand better why they needed a full coverage crown restoration on that too. When my wife joined the practice in the mid 90s, after leaving her career as a psychiatrist to run my dental office from the house, we turned to a focus on phobic patients. So we really put in a lot of technology geared at making the patient experience better. I mean, we started using air abrasion and lasers wherever we could for early carious lesions instead of the drill. Headphones in each room to drown out the sound. We had a full wall in between 2 operatories was a giant 300-gallon saltwater aquarium that could be viewed from the patients on either side, all geared at relaxation for the patient and dealing with patient phobias. I was like the first kid on the block to have digital x-ray in 1998 in my practice. And then maybe 2005, I was struggling with cumbersome charts. I mean, I've been a dentist for now 25 years and I had tons of paper charts, and it was hard to find the documents in the charts that I wanted. And I desired to have everything converted electronically, but there were really no systems in place for dentists back then. So along with my son-in-law, I helped create one that we used internally. So I got rid of all my paper in 2005 and went completely digital. And then about 2008, we added CAD/CAM technology and started making our crowns in office same day. So I've always been an early adopter, and even before the success of Facebook, I was already working many companies, doing a lot of lectures, helping, educate my fellow colleagues and whatnot. And I guess my second career really launched about 10 years ago. So coincidentally, 3 of my 4 children had landed in the Bay Area. We were still in New York with one of our children. And I got a call in 2010 10 from Dr. Howard Farran. Is Dental Town big in the UK?
Dental Town, you know what? I haven't come across it personally.
Okay.
There may be others out there. I haven't come across it personally.
Dental Town is a very popular print journal, dental journal called Dental Town. And also Dr. Farran started the Dental Town chat um, very early, 20 years ago, maybe, even before Facebook, before MySpace or any of the social networks. Dennis had an ability to go online and collaborate with colleagues by sharing x-rays and photos of a difficult case and say, hey, you know, I'm having trouble with this. What would you guys do? Or I'm considering buying a CAD/CAM machine like I was in 2008. And most of you out there have a CEREC, but a lot of folks, you know, I'm very interested in the Henry Schein version, the E4D, and I gathered opinions from users of both products and got some useful conversation, you know. So anything as it relates to problems we have in the office, you know, hey, how are you guys dealing with no-shows and last-minute cancellations? So Dr. Farran, when Facebook became popular and opened up business pages, he wanted to become friends with every dentist in the world. And Facebook capped him out at 5,000 friends. And he called me up and said, hey, Ed, I just figured out that Mark's dad is a dentist. And you must know a thing or two about Facebook. Facebook, I want to become friends with everyone. And Facebook's telling me I can't have any more friends. So I said, Howard, you can have unlimited friends, but it sounds like you set up your Facebook page as a profile, not as a business page. So I helped him convert it. And he said, you need to write an article for Dental Town on, does my office need a Facebook page? So this was back in 2010. I wrote the article, very well received, wrote another article a few months later on technology integration in the dental practice. And then the floodgates, so to speak, opened. I started getting a lot of calls and invitations to lecture and travel. And around the same time, my first grandchild was born. And the wife and I decided to move to California from New York. And I sold my dental practice and basically shifted my focus to teaching, lecturing, consulting with private offices, and advising startups. So I really get a large amount of pitches from companies with new ideas in the oral healthcare field. And they all seem to have a problem at some point. I can get them just so far, advising them with their products and whatnot. But eventually they need cash infusion. And sometimes I help them steer to what we call a family and friends round, where they can get their company off the ground, get a prototype, which they can then take to a venture capital company and try and get some more money. And another colleague of mine by the name of Jeremy Krell. I don't know if you've heard of the toothbrush in the UK, it's called Quip, Q-U-I-P.
I hadn't until we spoke about it the other day, but I don't believe it's well known in the UK.
Okay, it's a kind of a knockoff to the Sonicare for a fraction of the cost. And they have a subscription program where they'll automatically mail you like every quarter new brush heads and whatnot. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept behind giving away the razor because there's so much money to be made in the blades, you know, kind of thing.
It's why printers are so cheap, isn't it? You know, it's the print the ink cartridges. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Now I just throw my printer away and buy a new printer. It's crazy. Anyhow, Jeremy's about half my age, so he's a little more of a go-getter. And he also advises a lot of companies, startups. And last year he formed a company called Revere Partners. And Revere Partners is the first venture fund in the world that only invests in early stage oral healthcare companies. So I joined on with Jeremy as a venture partner, and we at Revere must have gotten over 100 pitches in 2021. We have a fund which we raise funds from mostly individual dentists who, decide that, hey, I don't know anything about these stocks that my stockbroker is telling me to invest in, but I know about companies in the oral healthcare space, and I want to put some of my money in that. So we've got some dentists investing like 50K a year US, like 12,500 a quarter. Each quarter, we put together a fund of 3 to 4 dental companies that our team of over 50 dental experts worldwide think are going to be great investments. And we'll invest like, anywhere from 3 to 500,000 per company in 3 to 4 companies each quarter. And we're starting to get some institutional money also. So we're hoping that by next year, our quarterly fund size will be more in the 2 to 3 million range, and we'll be investing 750K to $1 million per company, again, in 3 to 4 companies every quarter. We've only had 4 investments, or 4 funds already. We had 2 in 2021, and then a Q1 and Q2 this year. And already one of our companies was acquired for a 40% bump only 3 months after we invested in the company. So we're already seeing great success. We've got experts in everything from chemistry to the regulatory space, helping companies that have to get regulatory approval to get their products marketed. We have biochemists, we have obviously lots of dentists, we have specialists in every phase of dentistry, pathologists, analytics, financial analytics experts are part of the team. So we can look at companies and really brainstorm and bring, help them come along to market, and also pick and choose great companies to invest in. The other thing I want to talk about, and I know which is probably the primary reason why you brought me on today, is about a little over a year ago, I got to meet Dan Sindelar and the team at Keystone Bio, and the work they're doing with the eradication of the bacteria P. gingivalis from periodontal disease is just mind-blowing.
We talked about this prior to you coming on, and I had no idea that this link existed between P. gingivalis and, well, I'll not spoil the, I'll not take the wind out of your sails, but
a year ago, I was probably like most dentists in that I'd heard of P. gingivalis, but I really couldn't tell you that much about it. And I knew it was not a desirable bug to have in your mouth. I knew it was in my mouth because I had, at one of the lectures I gave about 5 years ago, somebody at one of the booths pulled me over and said, Dr. Zuckerberg, spit in this tube, and I'm going to give you a complete bacterial analysis of all the microbiome, in your oral flora. And on that list, was a bunch of bad stuff, including P. gingivalis. And, at the time, I kind of tucked it away for information and just used it as a reminder to make sure I get my scaling and root planing done every 3 months. Because I've got some, 4 and 5 millimeter pockets. I had some occasional gingival bleeding on flossing and whatnot. And, I definitely fell into the category of people with some early periodontal disease, like most of the population. I mean, talking about people over age 30, 50% have some form of periodontal disease. When it gets into my age group, the over 65 age group, the number is as high as 83%. And almost half or more of those have a P. gingivalis based, primary based gingival infection. And so, the first thing I did was, hey, this is like crazy stuff, but I ran a poll on my own Facebook page among my friends. But I asked all my dental and medical colleagues to exclude themselves from the poll because I wanted to really get a lay public perception of this. And I said, simple one word, yes or no answer. Have you ever heard of P. gingivalis? This is among the general public. And I got 75 responses, of which 74 said no. And the one who said yes admitted they hadn't really heard of it, but they figured out from the Latin derivation of the name that it sounded like a gum infection bacteria. So really no one in the lay public has ever heard of P. gingivalis. And they should, because P. gingivalis has been directly correlated with not only Alzheimer's disease, but all forms of heart disease, high blood pressure, strokes, heart attacks, cardiometabolic diseases like diabetes. The bacteria causes an impairment of the glycogen synthesis process that goes on in the liver. So the body's not able to reduce sugar levels adequately. And even with insulin dosing, the body response in individuals with P. gingivalis gum infections is not what we would expect. So it's very hard to titrate the appropriate amount of insulin to give a diabetic. Treatment for diabetics is enhanced and simplified when they're put on a periodontal program and restored to periodontal health. Digestive cancers like oral cancer, esophageal cancer, colon cancer, rectal cancer have been shown direct links to the bacteria P. gingivalis. Rheumatoid arthritis, various other types of liver disease. The list is mind-boggling how long it is. We're now research articles going on now that erectile dysfunction has a component which may have its triggers in periodontal disease with P. gingivalis infections and mental depression. Something my wife, who's a psychiatrist, is working with a couple of companies on now, also exploring that connection. So how does it do it? We've been studying over the years the brains of people who suffered from Alzheimer's disease. And in 100%, every single autopsy brain of people who died from Alzheimer's show the toxic effects of the bacteria P. gingivalis. That's a staggering connection. And yet, researchers cannot isolate the bacteria itself from the brain. And this actually makes incredibly common sense. If you think about it, using our knowledge base, we understand that P. gingivalis is an anaerobic organism. It thrives in areas with very low oxygen tension, like the subgingival pockets of patients with gum disease. It's a perfect place for it to live. Also, in its basic form, it's not as virulent as it gets later on after it lives in the subgingival tissues, becomes an integral part of the periodontal biofilm that can contain many bacteria, including Prevotella and a lot of other bugs that aren't as bad as P. gingivalis, but what happens is when they live communally, they share DNA. And P. gingivalis has the ability to incorporate the DNA from these other bacteria and turn it into its wildly virulent form. The other thing to understand, is that the brain has the highest oxygen tension of the entire body. I mean, one of the reasons why sleep apnea is such a dangerous problem is because during sleep, our oxygen tension in the brain is shown to drop from the normal healthy 96, 97% oxygen tension throughout the bloodstream down to, in some individuals, in the 70s. That's severe oxygen deprivation, and the brain is most affected by oxygen deprivation.
That can't
So
be good.
definitely links between sleep apnea and dementia. But so for that reason alone, because of the high oxygen levels in the brain that we need to keep our brains healthy and functional, P. gingivalis would not thrive in the brain. So the brain is not an obvious target for the bacteria itself. The other reason why the brain is not a target for P. gingivalis is that we've evolved, and many other mammals too, with an anatomical structure called the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is the reason why our brain and nervous system, for the most part, stays relatively sterile and infection-free. One of the known bacteria which can cross the blood-brain barrier would be meningococcus, which is why meningitis can spread rapidly and kill within a couple of days, sometimes with fever spikes, that are just crazy. So the scientists have been doing research studying P. gingivalis for over 70 years, and there have been over 10,000 articles describing all these correlations. Hey, we know that people with gum disease have greater incidence of heart attacks. They have greater incidence of digestive cancers. They have greater incidences of all these other issues. But we don't really know how until recently, until the research from PG, showed how this actually works. And the way it works, I don't know, do I have the ability to share screen?
I can send that across to you just now, my friend. Let me do that for you. Yep, it's all yours. There you go.
Let me bring up a slide on my end.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just go ahead and let some people in from the waiting room. There we are. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
See that slide here? Let me see if I can make it bigger. Here we go. So what you're seeing here is a PG organism, and the arrows show these small circular objects that are called outer membrane vesicles, or OMVs. Those OMVs contain toxic proteins that are released by the bacteria P. gingivalis. Now, those toxic proteins in gum infection get released through the bloodstream to different parts of the body. So the bacteria itself lives only in the periodontal pocket. But the toxic proteins that are carried away in these outer membrane vesicles invade other organs in the body. So, for example, they get carried through the vascular tissues, and they cause a increased permeability in the lining of the vascular tissues, which promotes calcifications in the arteries, leading to hypertension and strokes and heart disease. They've been shown that these outer membrane vesicles and these toxic proteins can increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. So it's the toxic proteins themselves that penetrate the blood-brain barrier into the brain and destroy the neuronal transmissions and the synaptic conductions that go on in the brain, causing the brain to malfunction and leading to Alzheimer's disease. The toxic proteins are the ones that go to the liver and affect the body's glycogen synthesis abilities. The toxic proteins are the ones that invade our digestive system, irritating the linings, causing tissue response that cause dysplasia and ultimately forms of digestive cancer and colon cancer and esophageal cancer and oral cancer. So it's through these toxic proteins that the bacteria P. gingivalis does its work, or its dirty work, and that's how we've uncovered the process. So now that we've done this and figured out the process, now the problem is, how do we clear the body of the infection that's primarily of P. gingivalis? And so even among the profession, there's still disagreement. Yet back in 2008, there was a study by two researchers at the University of Washington, Haji Shengalis and Rich Darveau. I actually know Rich Darveau personally. I've spoken to him for hours on length about P. gingivalis. It's just an incredibly fascinating organism that's learned to that evolved methods to avoid detection by the body's immune system. Probably the two most dangerous bacteria that have evolved in such a manner are P. gingivalis and H. pylori, which lives in the digestive tract. Very stubborn, impossible. They're impervious to any antibiotics. And yet the discovery, and this will make you guys proud, the discovery for the formulation that Keystone Bio is working with now was actually fallen upon in the UK in 1995. And if anyone's interested, I could provide more information about that research. So it was a very small trial, very small phase 1 trial, funded by, I forgot which university. And the subject group size was 20 people. So they put 10 people in a control group where they did scaling and root planing, and then injected some saline rinse into the subgingival tissues after scaling and root planing. And the other 10, they did scaling and root planing and injected this monoclonal antibody. It was a murine formulation, so it was built from rodent antibodies. This monoclonal antibody injected into the pocket after scaling and root planing in the other 10 individuals. And the individuals were monitored for about a year and a half. The control group that got saline had return of P. gingivalis within the first month of post-treatment. In the 10 individuals that got the monoclonal antibody, the earliest return of PG, detectable return of PG, was 9 months. And yet the researchers at the time were proposing a permanent cure by this one administration of this monoclonal antibody. So they determined that whoever was funding the research said, hey, this is not what we'd hoped. And also back in 1995, 27 years ago, we didn't have the understanding. We knew P. gingivalis is an evil bacteria, but we didn't quite have the understanding that there was a direct correlation with all these diseases. So no one picked it up again until Dan Sindelar found the literature. Dan, by the way, was one of the co-founders of an organization called AOSH, AAOSH, which is the American Academy of Oral and Systemic Health. So promoting the connection between the mouth and the body. Dan assembled an incredible team, including world-renowned vaccinologists and virologists. One of the heads of the cardiology department at the Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is world-renowned for their cardiac department. You know, quite an impressive team of scientists that worked with this murine version to develop a human chimeric version of the monoclonal antibody, found the binding sites where it binds to P. gingivalis and effectively shuts down. That we have all the intellectual property on the work that the team has done. And the biologic is now in trials in Australia in phase 1. So we are really optimistic based on the very small sample population, but based on the individuals in the UK back in 1995 that showed efficacy and safety. None of the individuals had any side effects. That the safety and efficacy phase 1 trial will go very well. At that point, sometime next year, we break off into phase 2, where we target individual populations with early Alzheimer's disease, populations with early detectable cardiac disease, early detectable diabetes, early detectable esophageal cancer or whatnot. And then over the course of a couple of years, those individuals will be monitored with the individuals having treatment of their gum disease with the monoclonal antibody versus the control group who will get something else. And then and only then will the biologic be approved for certain conditions. But next year, as soon as that early spring next year, after a successful phase 1 showing removal, effective removal and safety of the drug, that's going to create a ton of excitement among the pharmaceutical industry and big pharma players. And there's going to be folks reaching out, making Keystone Bio an acquisition target. Now, whether the company decides to have an early acquisition as an exit strategy at maybe a 10x multiple is one thing. I know in talking to the CEO, he's in it for the long haul. He wants this to be his legacy. He wants to be part of seeing this vision through all the way to the end, where dentists as part, or the hygienists as part of the scaling and root plating therapy, are routinely administering the gel into the pocket. And it'll have to be, if as we expect, it eradicates P. gingivalis for about 9 months, it's going to have to probably be repeated at 6-month intervals. At a cost on top of whatever the dentists are charging now for the periodontal maintenance visit, of probably about an additional $500 US for the drug administration, tripling or quadrupling the dentist fee for the procedure. But and not only that, but increasing tenfold the demand for the lay public to be seen by dentistry to care for their oral health. So my role, obviously, I'm 40 years removed from microbiology in dental school. I can't help the team with their research or anything like that, but I recognize that if we're going to have this drug in market ready status in 3 years, we need to change those poll results. So when we ask a layperson, have you ever heard of P. gingivalis? We need 74 out of 75 yeses. We need to make P. gingivalis a household word, an evil household four-letter word, like cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, heart disease, things that no one wants. I've got PG. No, help me. And then dentists now are going to get benefit now, even before the drug is ready, because people are going to say, hey, I've got PG, or do I have PG? And dentists can provide that answer via a salivary test. And then once it's shown to them that they have it, and over 50% of adults walking around have a PG-based infection in their mouth. Half. That's a huge number. Once it's been shown, and once patients are aware that they've got PG and that it's a bad mother, they're going to want the dentist to help them get rid of it. What can you do now, doc? I know you told me there's a drug coming in 3 years. What can you do for me now? Scaling and root planing will only, if it's really done efficiently, removing everything. And let me tell you, my hygienist removes everything. She scales down to my toes. I've got a very high pain tolerance, so I just tell her, go get it, man. I mean, my mother passed away 18 years ago of Alzheimer's disease. And when I did my salivary analysis last year, my PG on a scale of 0 to 10 was 9.7. So I'm a high risk for all those bad things. I actually, that test, by the way, was done right before I went for a cleaning. So it had been about 3 months before my hygiene visit. I got the idea after my last prophylaxis on April 1st to do a repeat 5 days later. So 5 days later, I did the salivary test, and I just got the results back about 10 days ago, and my PG score was only 3.7 out of 10, down from 9.7. But that was 5 days after. The studies show that within 3 weeks, PG populations are back to normal. So what do? Do I go see my hygienist every 3 weeks for deep scaling and root planing? That's not real practical. And even though I'm reducing the bacterial load of PG for a 3-week period after a scaling and root planing, I'm not eliminating it. And the half-life of the toxic proteins that are circulating in my bloodstream that have been released by PG are still doing their dirty work for over a month. So by the time PG returns in my mouth 3 weeks later, there's really been no, even though there's been a reduction in the load of PG, there's been no appreciable reduction in the toxic proteins circulating in my bloodstream. So while it may help a little, the actual therapies available to us now, be they rinsing with whatever, Closis, Listerine, you name it, whatever you want to, chlorhexidine, whatever you want to rinse with, scaling and root planing every few months, we cannot eliminate the toxic proteins of PG. We've got to get this drug to market, and we'll keep our fingers crossed and pray that it passes the trials that it needs to, and that we as dentists, by administering this monoclonal antibody as part of our routine therapy, can have the single greatest impact in reducing the health, in improving the health by reducing the incidence of these major maladies of disease. So to get through these trials, it's expensive. PG, Keystone Bio was undertaking a $50 million funding round. And there's been tremendous institutional demand to get in on this investment. And I went to the company shortly after they named me as their chief dental officer last year and said to them, look, I need tools to help educate dentists about the process of how PG causes destruction and end organ disease. And I also need an army of dentists to educate their patients and to speak to the lay population. I can't do it all myself. And to get people on board, I could think of no better way than to make a small investment in Keystone Bio available to interested dentists who want to embrace this, who want to educate their colleagues, educate their patients, and at the same time have some skin in the game to be a part of hopefully tremendous financial success that KB will see in the future and pass that on. So I was able to negotiate a $2 million carve out. So we're in the process of developing a vehicle to allow investment in 25K minimum increments by individual dental investors. They recently had a strategy change. They're so anticipating a successful and efficacious phase 1 that they decided that raising $50 million that they need to get through all their trials in the next 3 years at this point in time doesn't make financial sense. They'd give away too much of the company. They're lowering the funding round to 17 million ask. Planning that after a successful phase 1, they're expecting a significant bump up in the company valuation. Right now, the company valuation and the current round is probably going to be somewhere in the ballpark of about $100 million. After a successful phase 1, that number could easily go to $1 billion, a 10x in a year. And so they'll approach an additional funding round probably in about a year for the remaining 30 million or so that they would need to raise to get through the additional trials. But they'll be able to do that funding round at a much less cost to the company if the valuation is significantly higher. So now is an exciting time to get in at a relatively inexpensive valuation for people who understand this, understand the potential, and see, something that can really revolutionize the practice of dentistry and really elevate dentists. I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, dentists are second citizens when it comes to doctors. I mean, my wife, in her family, when she was growing up, the be all and end all was to be a physician, a medical doctor. And when she told them that she was dating a dentist, they said, you can't date a real doctor. So I think something like this could change all that. Dentists, if we can show that through a dental-based treatment, we can reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's, reduce the incidence and progression of heart disease and all these other maladies, dentists could all of a sudden become the most important healthcare provider in the lives of any patient.
It's an interesting one. I've never I've never encountered that myself. I'd be interested to hear if other dentists feel that way, that they're not favorably compared to doctors, certainly within the UK. Not something I've ever come across. But yeah, you're right. If there's anything that we can do in the whole world to help our patients, the first thing we have to start with is raising awareness, which is what we're talking about here today. And then also, as well as that, with Keystone Bio, I love that style of investing that you spoke about just a minute ago, because it basically turns it into a social enterprise, because you have lots of people who will preach about it because it's constantly relevant to them, because they're aware that they have equity in this company. And then as well as that, what that means is that there's a mutual benefit from them for the patient as well, first and foremost the patient, but then also the dentist, because they're propagating and spreading this message, which helps the company raise awareness about itself and what it does. So yeah, I love that style of investing. I love that style of
Yeah,
investing.
I mean, if the company is successful, dentists will profit even without investing. They'll have a new therapy for which they can, I don't know, dentists now for a periodontal maintenance visit in the US are charging maybe $150 to $200. Being able to tack on an additional $500 cost to that visit will be a windfall for dentists and their practice income. But having a play, I mean, having a potential 10 to 50x return on an investment that they put $25,000 into that can grow to $1 million or more is a chance to, have a double windfall.
Totally.
And so, the other thing is the education component is really critical, because adding $500 to the cost of dental care is no small figure. And a lot of patients are going to balk at that. So behind the scenes, Keystone Bio obviously is going to be presenting their data to medical insurance carriers. When someone gets sick with Alzheimer's disease or heart disease or cancer, medical insurance carriers are the ones who are brunting the most financial burden of those costs. And so if we can show medical insurance carriers that we can save them a ton of money by reducing the number of patients who are going to get these diseases, then the hope is that medical insurance companies will then routinely cover this treatment, even though it's performed in a dental office.
Cool. 100%. Absolutely. If people are interested in investing in Keystone Bio or learn more about it, or can they reach out to you yet? Is that something that they can do?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I've got a number of ways that people can reach out to me. They can reach out to me on my Facebook page, Painless Social Media. They can also email me if they'd like to, and at simply at DRZ for Dr. Z at painlessdrz.com. And I can actually type that into the chat field.
Absolutely. Dr. Z, I love it. That's cool. Great. So awesome to learn about Keystone Bio, and awesome to learn about P. gingivalis and its effect on the brain, because that was something that I had never come across. And definitely there'll be a lot of dentists out there who are now enlightened on that one.